Hello, and thank you for joining us for the TAA webinar, How to Write an Introduction That Will Get Your Article Accepted, presented by Meagan Kittle Autry. Meagan is the Director of Thesis and Dissertation Support Services at NC State University, where she helps graduate students to become lifelong scholarly writers. She earned her PhD in Communication, Rhetoric, and Digital Media. Her research examines expert writing across the disciplines with a special focus on communication in the sciences and engineering. She blogs about these issues on her website, meagankittleautry.com. Hi, Meagan. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Libby, and to TAA for having me today. I'm very glad to be here and to talk with you for the next hour or so about a really difficult part of our writing, and that is writing the introduction to anything that we're doing, which is why I wanted to talk about it today. A little bit about me to start. As Libby mentioned, I'm the Director of Thesis and Dissertation Support Services here at NC State. My instruction focuses primarily on helping graduate students write, and here at NC State, because we're such a science and engineering heavy university, the majority of our students actually write research article dissertations. So they're writing 3 articles or so as their dissertation instead of one long monograph. So I focus really heavily on talking about research articles and how to get them their first publication. But what we'll talk about today applies to you whether you are a seasoned vet or someone who is newer to publication. I think there'll be several things that are hopefully new and helpful for you here today. So what we're going to cover, what we'll cover today, a few key elements. I'm going to start with some context. We have to set the stage for why we're going to talk about research article introductions the way we will today. And then we will talk about the model that I had advertised about in the little paragraph advertising for the webinar. So we're going to talk about what's called Create a Research Space by the linguist John Swales. And then we're going to work through quite a few examples to show you how this applies to your field. Okay. So to get started, a little bit of history. Please, forgive my nerdiness here for a moment, but a little brief sort of parlay into the history of the research article. They haven't always looked like they do today, and this is important to consider when we talk about the model of a research article. Early on, when they started out in the 17th century, they weren't research articles that reported experiments or sets of data like we have now, but they looked more like letters or travel logs. Some of the earliest articles said things like, I took a walk in the woods and saw the most marvelous green leaf that I had never encountered before. And that's certainly not something you would ever see in an article today, but that's how we initially began reporting on science, particularly. And they began to adapt as science developed, and we developed methods for doing research, things that would be replicable, studies that contributed to the current work that was out there. So they adapted as the needs of researchers adapted and as we began to know more. And toward the 1900s, they started to be primarily experiment-based. So we saw a lot of reporting on experiments. And as they developed in the 1900s up until now, what we've seen is increasing uniformity across all disciplines. And that's really important because uniformity has become a feature for our research, whether you're in science or engineering or in the humanities like myself or social sciences, because research is about convention. And this is what a lot of my own research focuses on, is the idea that research is highly conventional because part of it is showing that you belong to this club of folks who participate in research. And over many years, we've established norms for participation. And publication is about meeting those expectations, establishing yourself as a member of the community and showing that you understand those norms and can work within them. So for better or for worse, we have these cultural constraints on what we do. And some of those cultural constraints come through in the uniform structure of a research article. So we understand now IMRAD as the standard format for reporting research across many fields. And IMRAD stands for the basic sections of a research article: introduction, methods, results, and discussion. Now there's some variation, of course. The only rule with writing is that there are exceptions to all the rules, and do keep that in mind as we talk here today. But this is standardized across many, many fields and doesn't and applies to many of the topics we're going to talk about today. So we're going to focus on the I here of introduction. So we understand uniformity as being key for reporting our research and having to meet expectations. The other thing that you want to keep in mind whenever you're writing an article for publication are the audience members that you're writing to. And as scholars, we have a couple of different audience members. Initially, of course, you've got the readers of the journal, and we always are thinking about those folks because they're our peers in our research community, and it's easy to keep them in mind as we're writing. But the other more immediate audience you have when you submit for publication are your editors and reviewers. And it's important to keep in mind their perspective too as we're writing. When someone takes editorship of a journal, their goal is to publish research that is very significant for their field and research that is going to help move it forward. When they complete their tenure as an editor, they want their work to show that they've published things that were important and contributed to increasing the base of knowledge for that particular field or topic. And so when they're looking at individual articles, they're looking for articles that help them to do that over their editorship. Their situation, of course, is that they're receiving hundreds or thousands of these articles every year. And it can be difficult to weed through everything to determine what's going to be most important and significant and what's really genuinely new for the field. So the burden on you as a writer is to establish right from the beginning that your work is both significant for this field that the journal is publishing in, and that there's something there that's new that's going to help move the field forward. And the burden is on you to establish this in your introduction, because otherwise they're not going to see a reason to send it out for review or to give it further consideration, even if your work really truly deserves it. So you have to be very explicit when you're talking about how your work is significant and new for your field. So that's a very important audience consideration here. The other element that I want to make sure to mention, and this can be, this is up for debate, but I always advocate, particularly to our graduate students, that you must be writing for the journal, especially when you're writing for your introduction. Now we have many folks who say, well, I want to wait till I get my results, and then I'll see what journal I can put it in, because you want to aim high and you don't want to, but if your results aren't quite what you're thinking about, then maybe you aim a little lower. But I say it's very critical to aim for a particular journal when you're writing your introduction and discussion sections, because this has to speak to the audience of the journal readers. And the way you set up your introduction has to make your work seem significant and important and new for those particular audience members. And it's up to you to make those connections. Now, a lot of people say, oh, always write for the journal, but they don't have very specific advice for how to do that. So today, the goal is to give you a model to show you exactly how to do this successfully to get your article accepted from the get-go. So, to summarize this intro bit here, there are cultural constraints. Research is highly conventional. You have to meet these expectations and show that you belong to the research community. And you have to keep in mind your audience who wants to see things that are new and significant for a field, and who is reading many, many articles. So you have to establish this yourself explicitly from the very beginning. So how do you do that? You do that by following what we call the Create a Research-Based Model for Research Article Introductions. This is a model that was developed by a linguist whose name is John Swales. He's very famous in the world of English studies, English ESP research, linguistics, and rhetoric of science. And many people have continued to develop this model over the years. So today I'm going to talk about what's the most up-to-date version, and what I've done today is amalgamated all of the work that Swales and then other people since Swales have done to talk about how you best set up your introduction for publication. And the idea here is that you are carving out a space for your work to exist in the field. What's Also important to consider here is that we often pursue our research because we see it personally as very interesting. I'm fascinated by how the culture of science works, and that's very interesting to me. But we can't publish our work on the basis that it's interesting. So in this model, what we do is we turn from what might interest you personally to why it's important for the editors and the audience members who are reading the journal. And this is why they would publish your work, because they care, because it's important. So how do you create a research space for your introductions? There's 3 basic moves. We're going to cover these in depth here over the next little bit. But really all you have to do is establish 3 key elements in your introduction. The first one is what we call establishing a territory, where you talk about your topic and its significance. Then you move to creating a niche for your present research. And then you occupy the niche by describing the present research at hand. Sounds simple, but there are a lot of elements to it. We're going to break those down for you here today. So, move 1, establishing a territory. This is where you start off from the get-go, establishing your topic and its significance. So this is what's going to help you write that dreaded first sentence, which is typically the most difficult part of your article to write. You know, how do we lead off? How do we make people interested from the beginning? And how do we say something that's going to be meaningful and write a good first sentence? That's always such a difficult component. Well, this gives you a model for doing so. And remember, we talked about how your work is interesting to you, but it has to be important for your field. So this is how you want to start your article. You want to start off by claiming that your topic is of central interest to your field. Your first sentence is going to, in some way, state what your topic is, but it's not only going to lay out what the topic is. It's also going to allude to being centrally of interest or significant for people who are doing research in your field. So that helps you lay out your first sentence or first couple of sentences by previewing A, what your topic is, and B, why it's important for people. Then you follow that up by beginning a short literature review. You do this in a couple of ways. You can make some generalizations about your topic, so things that are established in your field. What other people who are doing similar work to you would say, yes, this is well-known, commonly understood, an accepted way of looking at things. You start to review what is known about your topic. Along with that, then, you are reviewing some previous research. You're citing literature to support these generalizations, to support the claims that you're going to be making and establish what is currently known in your field. There's an important identity move here as well. So not only are you saying, okay, my topic is important for the field of biology, for example, and we know these things about my topic, but what you're also doing is you're demonstrating your understanding of the field by citing research at the beginning of your introduction. So you're showing that there's interest, it's a lively, vibrant area for research, and that you have a strong understanding of the scholarly conversations that are currently happening in your field. So significance, importance, generalizing about the topic, and using previous research to make those generalizations. There are some common phrases that we use in the Academy to indicate that your topic is of central interest. And I bet you have seen these phrases before at the beginning of some research articles. I just pulled some recent articles from a variety of journals across fields, and in the first sentences, I pulled out these phrases. Something has been extensively studied, or there has been growing interest in, or the common statement, recent studies have focused on, and there's a few other examples here, but these are ways in the Academy that we establish centrality of a topic. This is the type of thing that we say when we're trying to establish, hey, there's a vibrant scholarly conversation that's happening about this topic, and I'm participating in this too, so the work that I'm about to tell you about is important. You want to start off this way so that it's not just that it's an interesting topic, but that it's an important topic for the field to continue to pursue. So these are some phrases that you can borrow or build on as you're starting to establish the significance of your work at the beginning of an introduction. Here's an example, just to demonstrate to you what that possibly looks like. All of the examples that I've pulled today, I randomly selected articles from a variety of fields to demonstrate that this model applies across a variety of fields. That's what we're going to see in some of the examples today. This is from an article in Science that was published last fall on the topic of deforestation of tropical forests. So this is a field that pertains to biologists, conservationists, wildlife biologists, that general area, environmental science, that general area. So the article begins right off the bat with, rapid deforestation poses a major threat to one of the planet's greatest bastions of biodiversity, tropical forests. So, first sentence, right off the bat, they're establishing significance in a couple of ways. They name their topic, deforestation, and then they move to claim that deforestation poses a major threat. So the word major indicates some significance. And if you're in the field, this is something that you would value as being significant for your field to pursue as a course of study. If something is a major threat to the environment and you're in biology or conservation, wildlife, or environmental science, then you would say, this is important for my field. So what they've done well here in this example is they have worded the significance in a way that speaks to the values of the type of research in that group's field. So they say, rapid deforestation poses a major threat to one of the planet's greatest bastions of biodiversity. So they're sort of doing a double whammy here. Not only do they say that it poses a major threat, but it's a major threat to one of our planet's greatest places for biodiversity. So they're emphasizing the significance here a couple of times. On to the next parts of Move 1. So if we quickly go back to this to the framework for the very beginning of your introduction. So they've started by claiming that their topic is of central interest to the field. They're claiming something is threatening an element that's critically important to folks in the field of biology. So then they would move on by making generalizations about the topic and reviewing previous research. So let me go back to that slide. So after their first sentence, they make a generalization about something that would be commonly accepted in their field of study. They say small fragments typically persist in the aftermath of deforestation, which are unsuitable for most species. So if you're in their field, you would say, yes, we've established this, and then they have those numbers to cite to support that claim. This is previous literature in the field that has established that as knowledge. And then they continue to cite literature and say many of the species that originally occupied the forest will disappear from these isolated fragments, and so on. The literature review continues for a while. I do want to point out these words in red. What they're highlighting is a continued element of significance. So as they're citing the literature, their literature connects to what they have established as being significant about this topic. They've talked about how deforestation poses a threat to one of the greatest things about our planet, and that some species will die because of deforestation. And then they go on to say many species will disappear. So the literature continues to connect to the element of significance here. Their literature review continues on for a while. I haven't cited it all here, but this gives you an example of starting right from the get-go with a statement of significance. Here's a second example. This is the currently the most viewed article in IEEE Transactions on Cloud Computing. And I pulled that up the other day, and there on the first sentence, bingo, was a statement of significance for the field. So it begins with the advent of cloud brokers for mediating between different cloud providers and the cloud of clouds paradigm denoting the integration of different clouds, including clouds offering different abstractions, pose new challenges to software developers. Now, putting aside the complicated structuring of the sentence, and if that's something that you stumbled over like me, they could perhaps benefit from the science writing webinar that TA had a few weeks ago with Kristen. I would recommend that they watch that. But so the the complicated phrasing aside, what they've done here is they have indicated significance in a way that's valuable to folks in computer engineering or computer science. Anything that poses a new challenge to a software developer is something that an engineer wants to tackle. So they've phrased the significance of talking about this issue in a way that would be valued by folks in their research community. And this is the first sentence of their article. So this issue of cloud brokering poses new challenge for software developers. And then they continue by reviewing some of the things that currently exist in the realm of cloud brokering for software developers. I've omitted that here, but this demonstrates and is a good example of stating significance in a way that folks in that particular field or area of study would see as important as well. A third example of Move 1 here, this comes from my own field, so for folks in the humanities, this is an example that you might be able to connect with here. And it begins, over the last 20 years, a large number of studies on academic writing have been devoted to the research article, in particular, its structure, social construction, and historical evolution. So this author is making a claim for significance by saying that this is a very vibrant current research community. So in the last 20 years, a lot of people have been really attuned to this issue. And in the academy, we say that if a lot of people are studying something, then it must be important, significant, something that we need to be addressing. So he is just speaking to all of the folks engaged with this issue from the beginning here by saying, hey, all of us that are participating in this community, this is important and significant to continue to pursue. He then continues with a generalization about this body of literature, and he's citing some of the studies there. So he says, a number of these studies have concerned themselves with the overall organization of various parts of the research article, such as the introduction, the results sections, discussions, and even the abstracts that accompany the research articles. So in this first example, he's done a good job of appealing to the research community by talking about, hey, a lot of people are interested in this right now. So that gives you 3 examples of that first move, establishing the territory for your topic. What you want to do is start off in your first sentence by indicating your topic and its importance to the journal's audience, your readership here that you're aiming for. And this is the key thing that separates published work from unpublished work. And also professors from graduate students. Many of the graduate students know that they have to state their topic in the first sentence of a research article, but they don't have the sense of a research community in the same way yet to also be able to explain why their topic is important. Also, if you are a faculty member who teaches, you can, I know you'll understand the difference too between what undergrads know about fields or areas of research study and the type of writing that we do as scholars. Who hasn't had an undergrad who started a paper with, since the beginning of time, mankind has been plagued by war, or some other broad generalization that makes you cringe. And it makes us cringe because we know that articles need to start more narrowly than that, but they don't have the sense of a field in the same way that we do. So our writing is quite different and stands out because we, from the get-go, establish a narrow topic and the importance of the topic to the readership. Undergrads are attempting this when they're saying things like, in today's society or since the beginning of time, but they don't have the nuanced understanding of the field and research community to be able to do that in the same way that we do. So start off by offering that narrow statement of your topic and its centrality to the field. You also then move to review things that you currently know about that topic in the field. The examples I've shown here today are shorter because I can only put so much text on a slide, but you may spend a good amount of time reviewing things that are currently known in the field, establishing the current state of knowledge with a topic as it relates to your study. So this could go on for a couple of paragraphs or more, depending on the particular journal you're aiming for and the type of information that you need to establish as known to get for your particular study. What's critical here in terms of aiming for the journal is that you want to make sure you're including literature that the journal's audience would know or value. A tip that I give to the graduate students is that they might want to make sure to cite research from the journal that they're actually aiming for. So if they're, for example, trying to publish in science, then they would surely do well to cite some science research articles in their introduction. Same goes, for any type of journal that you're aiming for. This isn't just a political move, that's not quite the idea there, but the idea is that if your topic is connected to some of this previously published literature in that particular journal, then the logical conclusion is then that your information, your study, would also be of interest to the readership of the journal because you're building on that knowledge tradition. You're expanding on our body of knowledge as related to that topic. So if previous work was related to and important for those readers, then surely your research would be too. So you want to be making that connection. But of course you have to cite journals beyond the one that you're aiming for, so think very carefully about literature that the audience for that journal would know or value or see as important to also incorporate. So that's move one. You start off, you talk about your topic, its importance, and you review what is currently known about that topic as related to your study. Okay, so move two. Are you ready? After you've established what is known, you have to move on then to say what isn't known. And that's the important part of move two, is you start to create a niche for your research. So you've established the territory, you've covered the topic, currently established knowledge in the field, and now you have to do one of two things. The first two bullets here. You either have to indicate a gap in previous research, or you have to propose an extension of previous research at this point in your introduction. And then depending on your field, and this is typically most present in engineering, you also have to present a positive justification for your current work to happen. We'll cover some of that here in a second. But you're doing two important things. So you're saying you've established your topic, that it's important for the field, some things that are commonly accepted, reviewing what's known, and then in this very important move, you're stopping and saying, but there's something that we don't know, or there's a problem that still exists. All of research in the academy, mostly all research in the academy is based on the concept of problems. If there is a research problem or something that is unknown in our field, typically we say that that's something that should be addressed, with some exceptions, of course. But if there are problems in the field that are unsolved, then we see that as important to begin pursuing those things. So this is the move in your introduction then, where you say, but wait, there's something important that we don't know. And then, of course, by extension, then we should pursue that. So what does that look like? There are some typical words that mark move two of an introduction, and I bet you've used them, I've used them, and we know them when we see them in introductions. They're usually marked by what we call contrastive terms, and what that means is you've been establishing what we know, what is known in the field, and then you say, but wait, there's something we still don't know. So you're turning from the established knowledge to what's still unknown or unsolved in the field. You could use a single word to move. You could say, however, or but, while, despite, or though, or even though, or a combination of phrases in your writing here. You might say, little is known, or we do not yet know, previous research failed to determine, or on one hand and then on the other hand. These are phrases that we've all seen in introductions. Writers are intuiting, this is something that I have to say what we don't know, and there's this point that comes in your introduction where you have to move from the established literature to taking a stand and saying, but this is something important we still don't know. So what does that look like? Let's return to the example introductions that I had previously. This is the science article about deforestation. Now, as I mentioned, they had quite a lengthy literature review. They were reviewing what is known about deforestation and what is known about the species loss that happens after deforestation. So the last sentence of their literature review, the last sentence of their Move 1 is this first sentence here. They state, extinctions can be averted by reducing deforestation rates and reforesting tropical forest fragments. So this is the last important element of what is known that they had to cover in their introduction, and then you see they have their citation after that. And then they make their contrastive turn to start to carve out the niche for their work. They say, however, it remains uncertain how quickly such actions must be taken and what minimum fragment size is required to maintain functioning biotic communities. So what they're saying is, we know that we can save animals from extinction if we reforest very quickly. But what we don't know is just how fast we have to reforest and what the minimum size of that reforested part has to be if we're going to save these animals. Then they continue, they've got a second element of their Move 2 here, and they additionally say, most studies of extinctions have focused on birds, and they have some citations to reference that, and little is known about the sensitivity of other taxonomic groups. So they're expanding on the what isn't known here by saying, the research that has happened on birds, but we don't know very much about other groups, for example, mammals. So here's where they carve out the research problem that they're going to be pursuing. They say, we don't know exactly how fast we have to reforest and how much we have to reforest, and we really don't know what happens to birds. Now, in terms of study design, that sounds like a really big study to be reporting on in a single article. But it does just show you how you can establish two key elements maybe that are unknown, or maybe a sort of a main portion, right, how fast we have to refragment or replant forests, and then another component. And while we're at it, we can also figure out what happens to other taxonomic groups while we're studying this deforestation. So that Science article did it. This IEEE article, the most popular article for 2014, it also did it. And they stated, indeed, while support for developing specific types of applications to run in different individual cloud infrastructures is slowly becoming established, there is little support for programming applications that run across several clouds or types of clouds. This was the computer science, computer engineering article on cloud brokering. And what they're saying is, they had initially said that cloud brokering is a challenge for developers. And what they've then established as being important to study is the types of support for programming applications that run across several clouds. So here's a challenge, and we need to look into support further. What you're doing at this point is you're establishing the problem that needs to be pursued. And then the third example that we had, the example from English for Specific Purposes about the research article, he also does it. He says one aspect of the research article that has perhaps been most studied is the introduction. So here he's just finishing up his literature review, and he says, since Swales' seminal work on the move structure of the research article introductions, there has been considerable interest in applying the proposed model to other sets of texts, ... There's a little bit more review here. And then he says, there has been less research, however, on the variations in research article introductions across disciplines, despite the growing interest in disciplinary differences in academic writing. So here he's doing a really good job of moving from, okay, here's what we've established, the set of knowledge we've established. He's ending his literature review. He makes a very clear claim, though, for what is not still known. He says, there has been less research, however. So this is really, waving the red flag of, but wait, we don't know enough about this. And he doubles down on the importance of pursuing this problem by saying, despite the growing interest. So he's saying to folks in the community, hey, wait, we're all talking about disciplinary differences in academic writing, but nobody's looking at how introductions vary across fields. So he's making a gesture specifically toward the audience of this journal and the researchers in this community by saying, we all think this is important, but why is nobody doing this particular work? So to recap, in move 2, after you have established what is known in your field and the topic at hand, in order to justify the need for your research to the editors, to the reviewers, you have to draw this contrast. You have to then state very clearly what isn't known. And for many of you, when you make this contrastive turn and you use those words like however, but, or while, it's going to allude to your research problem or question. It's not going to be the specific statement of your research question. But if someone looked at that sentence in your introduction, they should be able to generalize about what your study would be. For example, in this previous our introduction about English for specific purposes, you could hazard a guess that his research is going to look at the variations in research article introductions across disciplines because he stated that's what isn't known. So that's something you want to make sure you're making clear in your move to in your introduction. When you're drawing that contrastive turn, what isn't known, this problem isn't known. Now, in many of our fields, research is getting increasingly complex. A lot of our work nowadays is highly interdisciplinary, so many of us can't just write introductions by doing move 1 very quickly and cleanly and move 2 very quickly and cleanly. Frequently now, we see that you have to sort of cycle between moves 1 and 2. Particularly if your work is interdisciplinary, you might have to establish a topic from a particular element of a field and what isn't known, but you might have another research area or field that you also are talking about, and you've got to review some of that work and what isn't known in that field in order to connect together all the moving pieces for your research. So it's perfectly okay and probably preferable if you make moves 1 and 2 a couple of times or multiple times in your introduction in order to get to a place where you say, this is very clearly my research problem. These are all of the things we do know and all of the things that we don't know in order to get to this one point, this one particular research problem that you will then be talking about in your article. So keep this in mind, and you will see this in research articles. A lot of them cycle through various examples. The computer science, cloud computing, cloud brokering example that I pulled from, they did this several times. They were highlighting where it exists in industry, where it exists in the academy. So they cycled through moves 1 and 2 until they got to a point where they had established all that was known and all that what isn't still known with that particular topic. The key here is you want to just make sure you're covering all the literature that you need to cover to establish both that you know and understand fully the topic in your area, but that you've highlighted all of the necessary gaps that cover your work, that justify the need for your work. So those are moves 1 and 2. You start with that claim for this is my topic and this is why it's important. You cover generalizations for your field, what is known. You cite the relevant literature, including literature from the journal that you're aiming for. And then you claim what we don't know at this point. And you maybe do this a few different times. At that point then, you have gotten to a space where you are basically at your research problem. You've essentially covered what your research problem is for your reader. And that's where there is then a space for you to occupy and say, and so this is my study that covers this problem, or that helps answer this problem. So this is where you get to move 3, introducing your present research and occupying the niche that you have carved out. There are a few different elements to this part. The first thing that you do and what's required regardless of your field is that you're outlining the purpose and or the main features of your study. And we'll look at an example again in a moment. And then depending on your field or depending on the journal, you do a few other things as well. So you could be listing your specific research questions or hypotheses. You could be announcing your principal findings, or you could preview the organization of the report that is to follow. And for many of these, my advice is simply to read the journal to which you're aiming and understand what conventions exist for that journal. So if you see that it's common in introductions that the previous authors announce the key findings of their research, well, you would want to be doing that too. You would want to be meeting the expectations for that journal. Or if they all preview the organization of the report, then you'll want to do that too. IEEE, for anyone who's in engineering or studies technical writing, that's something that's very common within that field. They always preview the organization of the report. So much so that IEEE has started to work that into their requirements for submitting a manuscript. So for these last three here, I always recommend that you're checking out the journal that you're aiming for and seeing which of these they do. And if they do them, then you would want to make sure that you are following the convention established for that audience and by that editor. Okay, so what does it look like then to occupy the niche and introduce your present research? So there are some key words that mark move 3, just as there were key words that marked move 1 and 2. This is often the point in the introduction that includes a first-person reference. So throughout a statement of importance and reviewing literature and then stating the current problem, we don't frequently see the first-person references inserted in there. But this comes the point, of course, that it makes sense because this is when you finally get to talk about the work that you are doing. So an example of what that looks like is to say, in this article, we report the results. When you see that phrase, it's a very clear signal that, okay, I'm about to describe the work at hand. I'm moving on to move 3 of the introduction. This is also generally the first explicit reference to the text at hand. So you see phrases like, the aim of this paper is to extend the use of the last novel described in literature review, ... So there's a few keywords here that mark that move so you can identify it in other introductions and use yourself to make sure that you are clearly marking move 3 in your introductions. So back to our trusty examples that demonstrate these moves very well. Move 3 of this article on deforestation was very clear. They stated, in this paper, we report the results of a longitudinal study of remaining mammalian species on islands with deforested fragments. So here they're outlining the purpose and or main features of the study, right? They're saying, okay, this is the purpose, we're reporting the results of this longitudinal study, and the main feature here is that it's a longitudinal study on remaining mammalian species. Because if you recall from the example, they were saying that, well, some studies had looked at birds, but nobody's looked at other taxonomic groups. So they are choosing to pursue studying mammalian species. They describe a little bit the study methods, which is sometimes common in the Journal of Science, but then they get to that other key component of the last move of the introduction, and they say, we found that native small mammal communities disappeared rapidly after fragmentation. So in this journal, they do preview some of their key results. That's increasingly common in science journals, including Science magazine itself. The idea is that there's so much literature out there these days, it's impossible, no one can ever read all of it. So by covering key results in the introduction, that gives readers a chance to preview if this article is going to be important for them. And so you'll see increasingly, particularly in the hard sciences, natural sciences, that they preview the results of the study in the introduction itself. We used to say that at the end, sort of surprise, here's what we found, but readers just don't value that in the same way anymore. So it's generally acceptable in the sciences now to preview those key results, and increasingly in other fields too. And again, you would know that by looking at the journal you're aiming for to see, okay, do all of the other articles or most of the other articles also offer a preview of the main results? You would want to follow that convention. Okay, I'm going to skip to the ESP example here. I'm saving the engineering article example for last. In the English for Specific Purposes article, they also use move 3 very clearly. The author says, in this paper, I report on an analysis of article introductions from 2 related fields, wildlife behavior and conservation biology. He describes those fields briefly so the reader understands them. He's just covering some knowledge that might not be common knowledge for folks in English for specific purposes. And then he finishes move 3 by saying, my results indicate the need for a model with a greater degree of flexibility in embedding literature. In particular, my study shows that the literature review need not just appear in the first move, but can also be embedded within other steps, such as indicating a gap. So he clearly starts off by stating the purpose of this report, and then he previews some of the results of his findings. So this is a humanities article where they're previewing the key results. So as you can see, that feature moves across several different disciplines. It's not only in the sciences. And what he's saying here, in case you're thinking, well, he's talking about moves of an introduction. What he's saying with his results is he's showing that in some fields it's perfectly acceptable to be previewing literature throughout the introduction, and it's not just contained to the first move. And I think that's very important because there are many ways you can demonstrate your knowledge of a field, and by citing the literature, you're showing that understanding throughout the introduction. So don't hesitate to cite other studies when needed to establish your point or establish your credibility as a researcher who understands the field very well. So that's an additional example of move 3 where they're very clearly occupying the niche and using those specific phrases that indicate to readers, okay, I'm about what's going to happen in this particular article. Now, there are a few instances of field-specific issues for this final move, which I alluded to when I was talking about the IEEE requirements. In some fields, you also have to offer what's called an evaluation or a positive evaluation of the research or end product. This is most common in engineering, particularly in computer science or computer engineering. So if this is your field, you would also want to be doing this. A sample phrase of what that looks like is, one advantage of our algorithm is, this is where the writers are telling the audience, so yes, we developed this algorithm, and not only did we develop it, but here's a reason why it's a positive thing. Here's a positive evaluation of our work that you would care about. If you're in parks, recreation, and tourism management, a common inclusion in the introduction is to also have a description of the site or study population, even if they're not critical to the research problem, but that's what was chosen. There's often a description at length of a paragraph or 2 about the site or the study population in particular. That field values establishing that right off of the bat. So you generally see that in introductions. So just something to be aware of. Now, if I haven't mentioned your field here, it could still be that there are field-specific elements to an introduction. And you would find this out by taking this model, which I saw a note about sharing those handouts after the webinar, and we can definitely do that so that you have the 3 steps for this introduction model. What you would want to do is try to apply these to articles that are popular, well-received, or canonical in your field, and just see, okay, well, how are they establishing importance? Are they doing it in conventional ways? How are they reviewing the literature? Do they seem to cycle between moves 1 and 2 several times? You can apply this model to articles in your field, and that will help you determine if there are any potential exceptions that you want to be aware of as you're writing. So for folks in computer science, someone in computer science was using this model, and they realized that, hey, wait, everybody in my field, not only do they say, okay, in this article we tell you about this algorithm we designed, but they also go a step further and say, one positive thing about our product is this. So then he wrote an article to share that with the field of writing researchers to say, hey, there's this exception in computer science. So it may be that there are those disciplinary exceptions for your field as well. The final field-specific issue that I've got on this slide is the previewing the organization of your report. I mentioned earlier that with IEEE, they've made that very nearly mandatory. The other place where you want to make sure you're doing that is if your article, in terms of its format, doesn't follow our conventional IMRAD, introduction, methods, results, and discussion article. Readers expect to see sections of an article reported in that order. So if you're reporting an article that's not in that order, to save confusion and to make sure that you're meeting their expectations and showing them what's about to follow, you want to preview the organization of the report for them. Okay, so I've saved that engineering computer science example for last to show you a way that they have enacted this final preview of the organization of the report. So the introduction ends with the sentence saying, "This paper describes Atmosphere, a middleware solution that aims at supporting the expressive CPS abstraction across data centers and clouds in a way which is effective for a wide range of communication patterns." So this sentence starts off with describing the purpose of the report. We're going to describe the product we developed. Then they offer the positive evaluation. Our product accomplishes something in a way that's effective across a wide range of communication patterns. That would be valuable in computer science if your application works across a variety of situations. Then they preview a little bit more of the product, which I've omitted here, and their introduction ends with this very short sentence, quick final paragraph that describes the organization of the report. So in this case, they have not followed the traditional IMRAD format, and they're publishing in an IEEE journal, and so they describe the organization for their readers. It's not highly sophisticated, but it accomplishes the job by saying Section 2 provides background information, Section 3 presents our protocols, and so on and so forth. But they're telling their reader exactly what organization to expect coming up. So those are the three moves in introduction. That's how you establish your project for readers in a way that tells editors you have something new and significant to present and that it's relevant to a particular journal. Now, I'm going to cover a couple of other important elements to think about, and then I'm going to show one final example, how it builds across an introduction, and then we'll have time, lots of time for questions, I believe. We also talk about introductions in terms of a shape, and the model that I've described to you here follows the shape of an inverted pyramid. So you're starting with a general topic and describing its importance for a field. That's the broad top of this inverted pyramid. And as you cite literature and establish what is known in the field, you move toward a more specific problem. You start to cut out things, okay, we've established this, we've established that, we know this, we're looking at that. And then you get to a point where you say, but we don't know something about this important issue, or we need to do more. And then you arrive at the tip of the pyramid. You arrive at the specific topic of the report, where you state, this article reports the results of a longitudinal study, ... So this is a general shape. You're moving from a broad discussion that's relevant to an entire field and covers your field to a point where you're talking about one specific research study, yours, that you just accomplished. So you're moving from general to specific here. What that looks like in the course of the entire article is after you've moved that way from general to specific, you write your article by moving it back in the opposite direction. So we talk about methods and results sections as also being highly specific. You're talking about one particular study that you accomplished. So you're not citing methods of other studies or reporting results of other studies. You're talking about the single study at hand. And then you move out toward the more general in your discussion and conclusion section by establishing why these results are important for the field and telling them what new knowledge has been generated and what those implications are. Now, a discussion of the discussion section is enough material for another entire workshop, but just to give you a sense of that picture, something you can be picturing in your head as you're writing, you want to also move from specific to general in the opposite direction as you're writing the rest of your study. So the last thing that I like to do when I'm teaching this workshop is work through an example of how it builds over time. So what I've done here is I've taken a very short introduction. It's 6 sentences from a classic study about bacteria that cause an ulcer. And I have students read it, and then we collectively put it back together. So these sentences are in the wrong order. I'll give you just a couple of minutes to read these sentences, and then I'll show you how we build it back together. Okay, so we know from the Create a Research Space model that the first thing we have to do in an introduction is start with a sentence that establishes both a topic and the reason why it's important for the field. So the sentence here that goes first in the paragraph is D. It says, peptic ulcer disease is a chronic disease characterized by frequent recurrences. So, and I've highlighted again here for you the words that indicate why this is important for the field. So they've established the topic in that first, with the first words, peptic ulcer disease, so we know right away what the topic is. And then they establish significance in the second part of the sentence. They say it's a chronic disease. So if you're in the area of biological research, as this author was, if you hear a disease is chronic, we understand that as something that's important for the field to pursue. We're always looking to pursue chronic issues. And then not only chronic, but it's also characterized by frequent recurrences. So any kind of disease that keeps coming back again and again and again and again, well, that's something researchers would say that's important to address and know more about this particular disease. So this sentence is the first sentence of this example introduction. So if we go back to these sample sentences, we've crossed out D, and we know now that after we've established the topic and its significance, we have to make a couple of generalizations about the topic and review some research. So which sentence makes a generalization about the topic? Well, that would be C. So we have peptic ulcer disease is a chronic disease characterized by frequent recurrences. The continuation of anti-ulcer therapy after ulcer healing results in a reduced rate of ulcer recurrence, but does not affect the natural history of the disease, because the pattern of rapid recurrence resumes when maintenance therapy is discontinued. So what they're doing here is they're offering a generalized statement about what happens and what we know about reducing the rate of ulcer recurrence. Now, this is a tricky one to place, and I'll give you a writing tip that helps us to understand why this sentence comes next. Typically in academic writing, we put old information at the beginning of a sentence and new information at the end of the sentence. So here they've started this paragraph with the peptic ulcer disease, the topic, and the new information is that it's characterized by frequent recurrences. Well, that topic, frequent recurrences, is the subject of the beginning of the next sentence, so the reduced rates of ulcer recurrence. That's how we know that these two sentences belong together, is because the second sentence continues to talk about the end of that previous sentence, frequent recurrences. And what they're doing here is they're saying, okay, well, we know that doing therapy reduces the rate of recurrence, but it doesn't affect the natural history of the disease, because as soon as you stop treatment, the disease continues. So they've tried to address recurrence, but we haven't quite solved that issue yet. So here they're offering a generalization about the frequent recurrences of this particular chronic disease. So we move on to the next sentence. They've made a generalization. So now you would need to review some research that supports that generalization and continues it. So the next sentence in this case then would be A. We would have, looking at the third last line here, we've added, recent studies have suggested that the eradication of Helicobacter pylori infection affects the natural history of the duodenal ulcer disease such that the rate of recurrence decreases markedly. What's key to note here is that there are quite a few citations from the literature, and this was particularly from a time when there wasn't much research on this topic. So by citing 5 articles, they were really citing all that was out there at the time. So they're saying, okay, and some recent studies have given us a little bit more information. If we target this one particular bacteria, that could reduce the rate of recurrence as well. So we have established the topic and its significance, peptic ulcer disease, and we've established, we've made a generalization about the topic and reviewed some of the research. So now the author has arrived at the point where they have to create their niche. So the next part of this introduction is F. However, so here's that red flag of, here is my contrastive term. However, the interpretation of these results has been complicated by the fact that several of the larger studies did not use control groups or any form of blinding. So this example is claiming basically not a gap in the research, but an extension of previous research. When you get the handouts from the study, you'll see again that move 2, you can either establish a gap, so however little is known, or you can extend previous research. In this case, this author is making a claim for extending previous research. And here he's making that claim on the case that basically the previous studies, they didn't have the best methods. They didn't use any control groups, which is a big no-no in that type of research, as we all know. So he's saying, okay, well, we do have these results, but they don't mean a whole lot because they didn't use control groups. So he's established the gap, the need for current research. We would obviously need to do further research because they didn't do control groups. So as he continues to write his introduction, what comes next? Well, he establishes a bit more of the niche here, and the next sentence is B. He says, in addition, studies of the effect of H. pylori eradication in patients with gastric ulcer have not been done. So he makes a case to extend the research by saying, well, the previous studies did not use control groups. And then not only that, but there's this particular study has never been done at all. So he's creating a niche by saying we would need to do research that addresses these particular issues. So then that leaves us with the last element, the final move of an introduction to introduce the present research. That leaves us with E. That leaves us with, we report the results of a randomized controlled trial in which we evaluated the effect of therapy designed to eradicate H. pylori on the pattern of ulcer recurrence in patients with duodenal ulcer or gastric ulcer. So the key words to look at here are the we report the results. So they're establishing the goal of this article, and they're giving you a bit of information about the type of study they did. They highlight that it was a randomized controlled trial, which draws a clear connection to the research gap or the need for extending the research that was previously established. And then they say we evaluated the effect of therapy designed to eradicate this particular bacteria. So here you can see how an introduction would build over time, moving from move 1 to 2 to 3 to establish a need for a study on the effect of eradicating this bacteria using a controlled group. So how can you apply this in your writing? When you receive the handouts, you'll have the model and you'll be able to do a few things. The first thing that I suggest, as I mentioned previously, is to look at recent articles in the journal you're targeting for your article. Your best bet is to target a specific journal, look at those expectations, look at what previous authors have done, and meet expectations by matching convention. So look at ways that they establish centrality for the field or the journal's audience. How do they talk about their topics as being important? Look at how much literature they review. Do they review much or do they review little? For example, engineers tend to review less literature and they tend to review the most current research and ignore stuff from earlier on. And then how do they present the current research? Do they use first person? Do they say we report the results? Maybe they don't use first person. Maybe they say this article reports the results. So by looking at articles in your target journal, you get a sense of the way that your target audience and editor and reviewers value the work being presented. So try to identify each move in several introductions. Then, of course, you get to take this to your own writing. The CARS model is very helpful for you to outline your introductions. This gives you a really great skeleton to start with, and then you can just fill in the model as you go. So start by thinking about what is your topic, that you probably know, but then more importantly, how is it significant for the field and particularly the audience of that journal? If your audience has a more narrow readership, it's a more narrow topic in your field, you'll have to talk about significance differently than if you were aiming for a broader audience journal like science. You also have to think about what generalizations you would need to establish. What types of knowledge do you have to prove we have and we know before someone would believe you about what we don't know for your particular field or topic? Think about what literature you should cite. What can you find from the journal you're aiming for? Which writers are canonical or which works are seminal in your field? What's most current that you need to be able to account for? So think through those things. And then how can you make explicit the need for your research? Which words and phrasing make most clear that there's a gap or that there's work that needs to be extended? You can go back to those key terms that we talked about. However, but, while, or little is known. Those phrases are all ways that you make it very clear that more research is needed on your topic. And then think about how you'll describe what you'll offer in the article. So this model gives you a really good outline for starting introductions, which are the most difficult part of our writing, I think. Finally, a bonus to learning this model today is that you have to create a research space in a lot of the other types of writing that you do as an academic. So this model also applies to other genres you write, like your article abstracts, conference proposals. You have to demonstrate that there is a research space that exists for presenting your work at the conference. Grant proposals, you have to justify there's a need for research on a topic so that you can get lots of money to pursue it. And finally, for our graduate students, dissertation proposals are a place where you have to do a good job of creating a research space. So you can use this model and adapt it to those genres as necessary as well. So those are the slides that I have prepared today. I hope that this was helpful for you.
That was really great, Megan. Thank you. We do have some questions. Here is our first question. Do you have any tips regarding summarizing and organizing the literature you search while you write the introduction?
Well, that's a big question. The biggest tip that I have, I guess, is that you want to be thinking not about individual articles, but about themes. So several people may have helped us get to a better understanding of what happens after deforestation. You don't want to be citing each and every single one of them individually, but you want to think about the overarching claim about what you can say we know in the field because of that. So if we know that quickly after deforestation we lose species because of these 4 articles, that's the type of claim you would want to make instead of highlighting individual results. Editors are looking to see your broad knowledge of a field, and so using those sort of overarching statements with the articles cited at the end of your sentence will demonstrate your good handle on the literature, but that you'll have also read enough of the articles in question that you can make that claim.
Great. Second question, would these tips apply to writing the discussion as well?
Yes. Swales had published that typically a discussion followed the reverse of the CARS model. Some articles since then have sort of disagreed with him slightly, but if you used it as a general model for talking about, okay, this current study, if you start with specific, the current study established, you know, this element, this new piece of knowledge, and then here are the other things that are happening in our field that it connect to, and here's a reason why these results are important, then you are making the right moves of the discussion. The key element in a discussion is that you demonstrate your work benefits the field by clearly talking about results that it connects to, other scholars, and those types of things. So as a general rule of thumb, yes, the reverse of this model can apply to discussions. I would again just suggest check out the journals you're writing to. What do they tend to look like? Can you see the reverse happening, the reverse CARS model happening in those discussions? And then you could perhaps emulate that yourself. Yep.
Okay, we have one more question here. Where should we list the field-specific issues? For example, I am writing articles on poverty and affluent suburbs. Should I briefly describe the characteristics, demographics of the suburb in the introduction?
So field-specific issues, well, it really tends to vary. This is where the journal can help you determine where it should go. And this is why you really have to write for a journal, because it helps you see if the journal wants that in your introduction after you've given sort of the preview of the report, or if they have a separate section after the introduction that's perhaps titled background, and then that's where you put some of that information. So writing for the journal is the most helpful element here. Typically, it would matter if it kind of goes in the order of an article. So if you start with, here's the organization of the report, and then you maybe make a brief statement of your methods and have to quickly explain some of those elements, then that's okay. And then you might highlight a key result and then maybe preview the organization of the report and then move on to the next session. I'm happy to talk about that over email too, if that might be more helpful, since that's a fairly specific question. But my best answer is check out the journal you're aiming for. And if you haven't chosen one, choose one ASAP.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions come through. So thank you all for participating in today's presentation. And Megan, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.